when you look at how things went last year for the Carolina Panthers, they got off to a pretty good start. And then, if I remember correctly, it was that Thursday night game where they got boat raced by the Steelers, and everything just kind of sort of fell apart for them. And you could really tell that Cam Newton wasn't quite the same. There was something significantly wrong with his shoulder, which ultimately led to his off-season shoulder surgery. And looking ahead to 2019, you look at the Carolina Panthers, and most of their hopes seem to hinge on the health and recovery for Cam Newton's surgically repaired, easy for me to say at 5 o'clock in the morning when I'm recording this, repaired shoulder. Like, that seemed to be what it was going to come down to. If Cam could come back and be somewhat close to the Cam of old, even if it wasn't 2015 version of Cam Newton, maybe even 2017, but his arm could hold up and he could get back to making some of the big throws that he could make, then the Carolina Panthers would have a chance this season. Well, Cam started the season as the quarterback for the Panthers, but he only lasted 2 games, and eventually he would end up missing the rest of the season due to a foot injury. But when you look at the 2 games, Cam didn't look right. I know some of it maybe he was a bit rusty, but just in general, like, something seemed off with him. And I still don't know if I fully buy that it was just a foot injury as to why Cam Newton was held out the rest of the season. But you're talking about the guy that your hopes had ultimately been hinged on, and he was gone after 2 games. But this team did respond. They won 4 games after that, right in a row, 5 out of their next 6, and all of a sudden you're looking at this team, the 0-2 start with Cam as the starter, then they've won 5 out of their next 6. You talk about a 5-3 team that's doing all right behind young quarterback Kyle Allen. Maybe he's not great, but maybe he's doing just enough. We have to think about moving on from Cam Newton in the offseason. But maybe you're thinking, hey, you're riding Christian McCaffrey on his spectacular season, an MVP type of season, 5-3 through 8 games. A lot of teams would kill to be in that position. The Panthers have a chance. And then it all kind of fell apart for him to the point where eventually Kyle Allen showed that he clearly is not the guy. Ron Rivera got fired with a couple of games left in the season, which feels like for both parties, the Panthers and Ron Rivera, was the best thing for everybody, especially when you consider Ron was able to quickly find a job in the Washington Redskins organization as their new head coach, which is not surprising that Ron Rivera got on the market, and he didn't last very long, that's for sure. Christian McCaffrey, though, still ended up having a spectacular season. It's a shame his team wasn't better around him. It didn't play better around him because the type of season that he had, I think he went over 1,300 rushing yards, cracked 1,000 yards receiving. Now, you've only had a couple of those 1,000 seasons in league history. If I'm trying to remember correctly, and please don't kill me if I leave one of the names off or I'm wrong with one of them. Didn't Marshall Faulk and Roger Craig have 2 of them? I can't remember if LaDainian Tomlinson had the other one or not. But still, the point is, some of those names that I'm talking about there, Marshall Faulk, Hall of Famer, LT, Hall of Famer, Roger Craig, should be and eventually will be, and maybe as soon as this year, Hall of Famer. That's the type of season that a Christian McCaffrey had. It was special stuff. DJ Moore, last year's first-round pick, went over 1,000 yards receiving, so that's promising. That means that you've potentially got one of your answers outside of wide receiver. Big problem for this team, though, was that their defense, especially in the second half of the season, was just atrocious. 29th against the run, 23rd in total yards allowed, 7 games in total of surrendering more than 30 points. So you're talking about a young, kind of low-ceiling quarterback combined with a defense that's giving up a ton of points. Not exactly a great formula for success, and what is helped ultimately precipitate the early termination of Ron Rivera as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. So looking ahead now to this offseason to kind of turn the page and close the chapter on what was surely a disappointing and frustrating 2019 season for Panthers players, coaches, the organization, their fans. First and foremost, you're going to be looking for a new head coach. And who is that going to be? And where's that guy going to come from? What type of philosophy is he going to have? Is he going to be an offensive-minded guy? Is he going to be a defensive-minded guy? Like, that's a critically important decision and the most important decision that this organization will have to make. Because you get it right at head coach, man, it makes things a lot easier. Like when they hired Ron Rivera heading into that 2011 season. They hired the right guy at the right time, and it paid off for them. But if you get it wrong, you get it really, really wrong. Then the second question that's almost as important is what to do with Cam Newton. He's got one more year left on his contract for a really, when you look at it, decent number. I think the number somewhere around 19 to 21 million, somewhere in there. If Cam Newton was to come back and even play a 2017 level Cam Newton, then you feel like you could ride with that if you're the Carolina Panthers organization, and you're talking about a cap figure that isn't all that prohibitive compared to some of the other contracts we've been seeing given out over the past couple of years to other quarterbacks in the league, some with lesser talent and abilities than Cam Newton for sure. But then you're also talking about you've already moved on from Ron Rivera. You talk about Cam Newton's been in the league 9 years now. He's battled injuries the past couple of seasons, only played 2 games this past year. If you've already moved on from the head coach, is it also time to move on from Cam Newton? I understand he's been the franchise player for the decade. I understand that it's hard to move on from a guy like that, but you also know that guys like him, and there aren't a lot of guys like him because the guy has a unique freak talent in his own right, but guys with his type of build, when they start to have injuries, they tend to, especially based off of his style of play, which was very dependent on being able to run the football, those type of guys tend to not hold up as well as they get into their 30s. So do you really want to sit there and run the risk of playing him another season where A, he might not make it through the whole season without getting injured, or B, he has enough moments that make you think, oh, we're glad we kept him, but then he has far more moments where you're like, man, we should have moved on. But then you win too many games to truly lose for Lawrence or F up for Fields, depending on what quarterback you prefer in the 2021 draft. Like, it's a really important decision for this Panthers team with Cam Newton. And it feels like it might be better, potentially, for them to sit there and move on and find a trade partner for him. I don't think you want to release him, certainly not. You would like to trade him. But if the market's not good, then maybe you bring him back for one more ride and see what you can get out of him. Looking back at this 2019 draft class, Brian Burns had 7.5 sacks. Their 16th overall pick out of Florida State, the edge rusher. I think that's just a foreshadowing of other great things to come from him. He was a really good first-round choice for them. Greg Little only played in 4 games. Will Greer played in a couple of games, and his performance is needless to say rough. I think he had 4 interceptions, no touchdowns. So clearly the long-term answer at quarterback is not currently on the Carolina Panthers roster. Now you got Dennis Daly, the offensive tackle, started at left tackle, played 14 games this season. So there's some hope there, but man, oh man. It'd be nice if Will Greer had shown a little more promise than what he did, but he didn't. They've got about $27 million or so in cap space as it sits right now. You could be potentially looking at maybe releasing a Dontari Poe and saving $9.8 million on the cap. Greg Olsen, is it time to move on from him, or is he going to go ahead and retire and join the broadcast booth somewhere? If he does, are you looking at saving $8 million in the cap for him? That's a possibility for sure. In terms of the free agents that they have, you have guys like Gerald McCoy, Darrell Williams, Bruce Irvin. Maybe they'll bring some of them back. Maybe they wouldn't. Mario Addison, you would think that they would at least explore bringing him back. But the big deal is going to be around James Bradberry. Are they going to end up having to use the franchise tag on him? Bradberry's going to want a big contract. I can't blame him for wanting a big contract. The market would justify giving him a big contract based off of competition. Another team's desperate for help in the secondary. Will the Panthers let him walk, or will they retain him? Interesting, and only time will tell. In terms of this upcoming draft, depending on the decision that you make with a Cam Newton, depending on what happens with Greg Olsen, depending on what happens with the head coach search, it's going to be a phenomenally important draft for this Carolina Panthers organization. I still think whether you retain Cam Newton or not, the number one team need is going to be quarterback. Now, whether they ultimately get a quarterback out of round 1 in this draft remains to be seen. Could be similar to what I talked about in the Chargers recap, is they could sit there and say, hey, we might miss out on the top 3 quarterbacks. They might go like picks 1, 5, 6, so we're sitting there at 7. Maybe you take a player at another position that you have rated higher on the board than the next quarterback, but then maybe you come back up from early round 2 and you go get that quarterback at the tail end of round 1. That possibly could happen. They could just end up staying put at number 7 and taking quarterback. They could trade up, could do any number of things. But I think at some point in time, in round 1, they've got to address that quarterback position, especially if the quarterbacks are right. They have to. It's an absolute must. In terms of other needs on their team, I look at the trenches. I think they could use some help at defensive end. Yes, you've got Brian Burns as an edge rusher, but you could use some help up front. But again, a lot of this is going to be determined too based off of the coaching staff that they bring in and whether they're going to keep running a 3-4, they're going to go to a 4-3, remains to be seen. Either way, I think offensively, you're looking at some more help at wide receiver opposite DJ Moore. I think you're looking for some help as well on the offensive line, specifically at tackle. And even with Greg Olsen coming back, let's say, I still think you want to address that tight end position at some point in time. That said, there's also a big part of me that wonders if the Carolina Panthers are going to try and bottom out under a new head coach in 2020 to truly tank for Trevor or F up for Fields or job for Justin, as we might say, to use a wrestling term, and really try to use 2021 with a high pick that they could use on a potential franchise player quarterback as the real start of their rebuilding project. Because this Carolina Panthers team right now feels like a team that's on the precipice of needing a full-on rebuild, and 2020 might be the season that helps kick that into motion.